Hi everyone, I'm Devin Banerjee, Editor-at-Large for Business and Finance at LinkedIn. I'm thrilled to be joined by Amazon's new CEO, Andy Jassy, to learn about his career journey and get his perspective on a variety of career topics. Andy, welcome. It's great to be with you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the current job market. There's just an enormous number of people out there ready to turn the page, start a new chapter of their careers. We at LinkedIn are calling this the Great Reshuffle. Where do you see some of the best opportunities?
Well, yeah, you're right. The economy is doing quite well, which is great. But as we all know, the economies will go through fits and starts over time. And so people want to pick places that really fit with passions they have and what they want to work on. And I think you want to pick a company that has some impact on the world and that is growing and whose future growth prospects are promising. And where you can imagine building a long career. And so, we feel like at Amazon, it's a pretty unusual place to build a career. It's an amazing place if you want to have an impact on the world. And we really exist to help make customers' lives easier and better every day. And we relentlessly innovate to make that so. And so, a lot of people talk about missions like that, but it's really hard to walk that walk. And I think if you look at Amazon in the first 25, 27 years we've been a business, we have really been inventing and changing customers' lives every day in lots of different areas. And we're growing at a very rapid rate. So, we recently announced that we have we're hiring 55,000 technical and corporate employees. We also just announced we're going to add another 125,000 employees in our fulfillment center network. And so these, there are a lot of opportunities, and they're across a really broad array of functions, ranging from software development engineers to product managers to people in marketing to people in design to machine learning and AI practitioners to research scientists to all kinds of jobs in our fulfillment center network and across all our businesses, because we're growing in our retail business, in our AWS business, in our advertising business, in our devices and Alexa business, and our entertainment business. It is a very early stage in the history of Amazon, and if you're somebody who likes to have an impact on the world, I think it's hard to find a place that's more exciting to work than Amazon. So we hope a lot of the people who are thinking about new opportunities will think about Amazon.
I want to ask you about job interviews. You've interviewed hundreds, probably thousands of job candidates through your different roles at Amazon. What advice would you give anyone wanting to make a great impression in a job interview?
It's a good question. I think a couple of general things, and then I'll maybe speak a little bit about what we look for at Amazon. But I think the first thing is just be yourself. At the end of the day, you want to work at a company who values you for who you are. And if you fake it in the interview and get the job, and then you end up being either having to continue to fake it, or people don't know who you are and don't appreciate that, you're not going to be happy. So really be who you are and see if there's a fit. I think the second general thing I'd say is answer the questions. A lot of times when we all sit in interviews where a question's asked, and instead of just directly answering the question and elaborating further, people will spend 5-10 minutes kind of, with a warm-up, and then sometimes get lost and never get to the answer. And so I think I would recommend always start with your answer directly from the question, and then you can kind of elaborate further. I think in terms of what we look for, I think we want people who are really passionate about customers, and trying to think about what customers care about and build experiences that they want. Even if it's, you're not sure what the business model is going to be, if you start with the customers at the center and move backwards from there, you're usually going to be able to find an experience they care about and that might have a business model as well. I think we also like people who are inventive and creative. And you can exhibit that both with respect to what you've done in the past, but also in the way you answer questions, especially open-ended questions. We like people who are strategic and can see the big picture, but who also are passionate about the details. And what I've learned in my time at Amazon is that all of the best ideas we talk about or put on a whiteboard, where the rubber meets the road is the details. And it's true at every level, from the senior-most levels at Amazon all the way to the junior-most roles. You have to be good at being able to execute the details. We like people who have high standards. Our customers have very high standards. I think customers today, with their access to information and choices, appropriately have very high standards. So we need people who have high standards here. We like people who I would say are more missionary than mercenary. And what I mean by that is we want people who care most about the mission of what the team and the company are trying to accomplish, and will put the goals and the mission above the goals of themselves. And so mercenaries tend to prioritize themselves over the team and the mission.
Right.
We want missionaries. And then people who are humble and realize they don't know it all. And I think the second that you believe you know what there is to know is the second you're really unwinding as a professional. We learn so much every few months here. And being open to challenge your most closely held beliefs and learning is one of the most important characteristics of long-term employees here.
Andy, let's roll back the clock to your own career path in your 20s. Did you have like a master plan, or did you figure it out as you went along?
I had the opposite of a master plan. And I think as I'll share some detail, you'll see that it was not a well thought through plan. But when I was thinking about my first job, I had two experiences in college that shaped what I was initially thinking. I worked on the business side of my school newspaper, running the advertising group, and that was a really interesting initial business experience. And we started a new national college magazine called Class Act, and that was a very fun, stimulating entrepreneurial experience. And then I worked for 3 summers in between years of college at Fox TV in New York, helping start a morning show, which still exists, called Good Day New York.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I loved the rush of TV. And that experience largely made me want to pursue television. And I'm also a very passionate sports fan. And so I decided I was going to be a sportscaster. And I created my resume reel. I sent it to 100 markets. And I only got 2 opportunities. At the end of the day, I just couldn't pull the trigger on living in the more remote places I was going to have to live, being from New York. And so I took a job at ABC Sports as a production assistant working on their college football scoreboard show. And I really liked that experience, and game day was fascinating.
Yeah.
But the rest of the week was not as interesting to me at 22. And at the end of the day, I didn't have enough passion and tunnel vision for that opportunity to pay the dues that you have to pay to get the responsible jobs. And all of my peers did. And so I went back to a company that I was referred to by one of the people I worked with at the school newspaper. And it was a great product management opportunity. It was called MBI, which is a direct marketer of collectibles and continuity series. And it was a really great general managerial experience that felt very entrepreneurial because you got to start, imagine and start a lot of small businesses. I did that for a bit, and then I left that and started my own business, and that was a great experience for a couple of years. And those businesses did fine, but they never were going to be big businesses. And when I was in college, because I decided I was going to be a sportscaster, I never really seriously contemplated any other professions or took enough classes to allow myself to be qualified for some of those other opportunities. So I went back to graduate school for business. And when I was leaving graduate school, I was really probably going to start my own business again. I was managing a band at the time in Boston, and I was thinking about starting a music management and label idea or agency, and I was also considering some other tech jobs, and I had not even contemplated Amazon. I came back from an interview in the Bay Area on a red eye. I got in at like 6:30 in the morning, and I was going to a concert in New York City I was going to drive to at noon. And on my answering machine, there was a message from a woman who saw my resume in the resume book and said that she thought that maybe I could be a fit, and she had 1 cancellation, and was I willing to do an interview at 9? And since it fit in that schedule, I said, okay, I'll try it. And I really liked the person I interviewed with. I came to Seattle and loved the people I met and the mission and how customer focused the organization seemed. So I decided to join Amazon, and when I was coming, they wouldn't tell me what group I was going to be in, what my job title was going to be, what I was going to be working on. But for some reason, it was very important that I start in May. And where I was at school, we had this month in between graduation, our last exam, and when you walk through graduation, which was a really fun month. You hung out with your friends
Right,
and
sounds
you
fun.
played golf or do whatever you're going to do. And so I didn't do that. I came to work here for a few weeks, and I started in the marketing team when it was just about 8 people. And we split up all the jobs. All the jobs were too big for each of us, but we had to kind of each take a piece of it. And I started working on customer retention, which fit with my direct response background. And I did that for a few weeks, and then I was asked to work on what we call a SWAT team project to look at other categories we should think about getting into before the brand cemented as a books-only brand. And so I looked at music, which was really like writing a business school case, and that was really interesting. And I went back to marketing and built out our customer relationship marketing team. And then I went back to music and ran product management, and then was the general manager of our music business for a while. I went back to marketing and co-ran marketing. So you can see this is not, well thought out.
This is the opposite of a master plan.
This is the opposite of a master plan. And I did that for about a year, co-ran marketing for a year. And then I got offered this incredible opportunity, unlike anything I'd done before or since, to be what they then called the executive shadow for Jeff Bezos. It was really like a chief of staff role where we spent all our time together, and even including in his one-on-ones, which didn't make them one-on-one anymore. And then we would debrief each week on what we heard and what was important to follow up on, and try to divide and conquer how to do so. And for him, it was a way to extend his bandwidth. For me, it was just an incredible opportunity to see a lot of parts of the business I didn't get to see when I was in management jobs that were more functional. And so I did that for about 18 months. And coming out of that job, I left to kind of explore an opportunity that we thought, might be interested in building a technology infrastructure platform that might allow our internal consumer business to move more quickly. But we figured if it would work for our internal team, which is highly technical, it might be something interesting for third parties as well. And so that became really the vision document that we wrote that became AWS, and I managed that the last 18 years before doing this job. So that is kind of the opposite of a master plan. But I think the one, some of the common pieces are, I think, my wife gave me a really good piece of advice, career advice, when I was leaving business school and I was agonizing over what to do. And she said, it's probably not going to be the last job you ever do. And while it's turned out that I've been at Amazon for those 24 years since, I've done a lot of different things. And I think not worrying about trying new things and trying to go with your, really what your passions are and what you could imagine being excited about. And then once you take those jobs, whatever they are, and no matter how different they are from your background, fully committing and being all in have been common characteristics of the different experiences I've had.
Andy, I want to ask you about mentorship and how it's evolved over time. What do you view as the modern approach to mentorship today, and who do you consider to be a mentor of yours?
Well, I've been incredibly lucky in having several really influential and terrific mentors along the way, and continue for that to be the case. And I think and they range from my dad, who has had a big impact on my life and continues to people like Rick Dalzell, who was our CIO at Amazon for the first 10 years I was at the company, and was my boss at the very beginning of AWS, to Jeff, who I've worked for now for 20 years, and one of the most unique business people and thinkers I think in the world and that I've ever met. Now, I think mentorship, at least today, seems to be a combination of modeling behavior, coaching, and then just giving people significant opportunities that allow them to stretch, and being there for them when they need help.
Yeah.
And all the mentors I mentioned, I've seen it. My dad, I grew up wanting to be like my dad. He's smart and high judgment and very level-headed and humble. And never took himself too seriously. And he also taught me a lot of lessons along the way, and a lot of it was just modeling behavior and things in his everyday life that he doesn't remember, but I remember. So I always remember this story when I used to play soccer, and my younger brother did too, and I was at one of my younger brother's soccer games, and I was driving my dad nuts. I couldn't sit still, and the field was in the middle of this track, and he said, why don't you go run a mile around this track? he was trying to have me do something to exercise my my impatience. And I ran a mile around this track, and I ran it really slowly. And I got back, and I was very pleased with myself. And I said, "See, I ran a mile." And he just looked at me and he said, "If you're going to run it that way, don't bother. Like, either if you're going to do something, do it right or don't do it at all." He does not remember saying that, but it always stuck with me in everything I do. If I'm going to do something, I try to do it, right, and give all the effort I can possibly give. And I think somebody like Rick Dalzell, he had a way of holding people accountable that was very direct. And at the same time, right after that, he had a way of putting his arm around somebody so that they realized it wasn't personal, but it was really about making them better. And I learned a lot watching him. He also, in the early days of AWS, as I mentioned, I worked for Rick. I had all kinds of questions. We were really grappling with the business model and the definition of services. And, he never answered the questions for me. Even at times where I might have liked for him to have given me the answer, he never did. He always made me do it myself, always made me think it through. And that really helped me grow, and I appreciated it. And Jeff, too. Jeff has had... and I've had several people like this, and I've been lucky, who've probably had more faith in me than I had in myself at different times in my career. And again, always there to give counsel. I learned a lot from him about how to think about having the right leadership team with enough people whose counsel you really trusted, and how to think about invention and how to think about the right standards for what you're doing, how to spend your time. I learned a lot from his counsel, but also watching the way that he conducted himself and the way that he ran the business and what he spent time on. And so I really do think that the modern mentoring model has to be a combination of modeling behavior and coaching people, but also giving people really big opportunities that allow them to stretch, and then being there as a sounding board to help when people need help.
Yeah. Of the big tech companies, Amazon probably hires the most people without college degrees. How can people develop careers today without a college degree to begin with?
Well, is it helpful to have a college degree? I think yes. Do you have to have a college degree to have a successful career? No. And we're really proud of how many opportunities we have for people of all backgrounds and all educational backgrounds too. And we have a lot of jobs, particularly in our fulfillment centers, where you don't need a college degree. And these are good, solid jobs that we pioneered moving the minimum wage to over $15 today. Our starting hourly wage is $18.32. But it's not just the competitive compensation. We also have a set of benefits you just don't find at most companies. It's full health insurance and 401k and 20 weeks of parental leave. And then when you come back after that, if you want to ramp up, you can have 8 weeks of working half the time. And things like Career Choice, which is our program we've had for about 10 years that help our fulfillment center and operations network folks have the opportunity to upskill and to get more education. And so we just announced a few days ago that a pretty significant enhancement to our Career Choice program, where people, our fulfillment center employees, can have their full college tuition paid for, and they also have the ability to get ongoing education every year and to learn new skills. And so, I think when you have the opportunity to make a competitive wage and get very full benefits, and then the opportunity to keep learning and evolving your skill set and taking on different types of opportunities with the breadth of opportunities we have in the company, as well as preparing people to take jobs elsewhere if that's what they prefer, it's a pretty good situation. Yeah.
Andy, going back to Amazon's earliest years, your company's been a standout in welcoming LGBTQ candidates. Talk about Amazon's commitment to diversity today. What does that look like?
Well, you're right in the history, and the woman who hired me, who called me with my resume in the resume book, Jennifer Cass, really was instrumental in getting the same-sex referendum passed here in Washington State. And we have, we're pretty proud of being recognized by the HRC Corporate Equality Index as having a perfect score the last several years. And we have a very vibrant LGBTQ plus community. We have about 7,000 people in the affinity group called Glamazon here. But I would tell you that having a diverse and inclusive culture and company is obviously about more than one group, and it's really important. And we see the future of Amazon as being diverse and inclusive and accessible. And the reality is, if you want to do what we do at Amazon, where we serve so many customers, hundreds of millions of customers all over the world, you have to have a diverse workforce or you won't build the right experiences. It's also the right thing to do, but just practically, you just won't build the right experiences if you don't have the right diversity. And so it's a very important area of focus for us. And we're not where we want to be today. I think we made a lot of progress, but we have a lot more progress to make. And we're working hard at it. It starts with having the right data. And we just released a significant amount of public data on kind of where we are and the the improvements we're making in the areas we have to get better in. But it's also not just the broad data. We have spent a lot of time over the last number of months digging really deep into the detail around how we hire and how we promote and how we develop employees and how we evaluate and trying to find areas where we can be better and then make those improvements. And and then it comes down to you have to have real programs and real goals. And we have a pretty broad number of those. If I just take some of the goals we have around adding more Black employees to the company and then having the right career path. We've built a program called RISE, which is really an executive leadership development course for promising Black leaders here, where they get mentored by senior people. And we took a goal in 2020 to double the number of directors and vice presidents who are Black at the company, which we made, and then took the very ambitious goal of doubling it again in 2021, which we're working hard at. And we have, a very broad number of these diversity inclusion goals. And as I said, it's the type of thing that we've made a lot of progress on, but you never really check it off and are done with it. You have to really be committed to working on it every day, which we are.
Yeah. Andy, one of Amazon's core principles is learn and be curious. What are you curious about these days?
I'm curious about a lot of things, Devin. I'm curious whether or not the offensive line for the New York Giants and their young quarterback Daniel Jones are going to take a step up this year. I'm curious about what Brady Carlisle's next record is going to sound like. I'm curious about what the new Lord of the Rings TV series we're doing is going to bring us. And I'm curious about a lot of things, but I spend probably the most amount of time outside of work on the union of educational opportunity for lower socioeconomic families and racial equality. And I think in most modern economies, the U.S. being one of them, it's just very tough to participate in as expansive a way as you may want to if you don't have the right educational opportunities. It really is the key that opens a lot of doors. And you can see it in data. If you look at families with household incomes under $56,000, only about 16% of those kids go to college. Where conversely, if you look at families with household incomes over $108,000, about 82% of those kids go to college. Wow. That's a giant divide.
Yeah.
And one of the organizations I'm involved in here is an organization called Rainer Scholars. And the mission of the organization is to enable kids of color who've never had a family member attend college, get prepared for, get into, and graduate college. It's about a 9-year program, and it's really had amazing results in our city. About 91% of the kids who go through the program graduate college in 5 years or less, which is more than double the national average. And what you really see when you're involved and you get to watch kids in organizations like that is so many kids can do it if they're given the chance. They have to have the right teaching, they have to have the right organization, the right structure, the right coaching. But if you give it to kids, so many kids can do it. And so I'm curious about whether we're going to decide as a country that we need to go further upstream, because a lot of the decisions in whether somebody's going to believe the educational system is for them is not when they're high school. And it's actually not even when they're in middle school. A lot of times it's late elementary school. And so are we going to build the programs? And by the way, in some cases, some people argue it's in kindergarten or earlier. Are we going to find a way as a country to go further upstream and help a lot of kids that today don't feel like the educational system is for them, feel like it is, so they have the same opportunities as kids who grow up in affluent communities?
Well, we have covered a lot of ground and received great insight on many, many subjects. Andy, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with this Career Day audience.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Devin.